He knocked at midnight rain, dripping off his jacket, like guilt trying to escape a soul. I thought it was just the wind. Again, loneliness has a way of sounding like old doors. But when I opened it, he was there. A young man trembling under the porch light, holding something in his hands that looked heavier than it should have been. Mr. Miller. His voice cracked through the rain. "We need to talk about Claire." For a moment, I couldn't move. The house behind me was silent. The kind of silence that remembers everything. My wife was asleep upstairs, or so I believed. And yet hearing her name from a stranger at that hour felt like betrayal echoing through the walls. He looked barely 30, eyes sunken, knuckles pale from clenching whatever he was hiding under his coat. I didn't invite him in, not yet. Years of self-control taught me to listen to silence first. "Who are you?" I asked. Voice, steady, though something inside me cracked. "My name's Ethan," he said, swallowing hard. "Claire told me about you." The words landed slow, like drops of cold rain on fire. Claire told him about me. My wife, 50 years old, quiet, composed. She'd always been the type to keep her world neat, folded, and locked away. But this man standing in the rain spoke her name as if he'd held her secrets in his hand. He reached out, offering me an envelope. The rain had already blurred its edges, ink bleeding like veins across the paper. I didn't take it at first. There's a kind of dread that lives in the body long before truth arrives. She said, "If anything happened, I should come to you," he murmured. I stepped aside. Against my better judgment, I let him in. The storm followed us, humming against the windows. He stood in the glow of the hallway light, dripping water onto the floor. The smell of rain mixed with the faint trace of my wife's perfume lingering in the air. It was a cruel combination, familiarity and intrusion. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter. "You said Claire sent you." He nodded, staring down at his shoes. She's not answering my calls. I went to her place, but she wasn't there. I didn't know where else to go. Something in his tone didn't fit. "Her place," I repeated slowly. He looked up, startled. "You mean she didn't—" His voice caught. "She told me she lived alone." My stomach turned like the floor had shifted. Claire hadn't lived alone for 30 years. She'd lived here, in this house with me. I picked up the envelope. Inside were photographs folded carefully, each one sharper than memory. Claire standing in front of a cafe I'd never seen. Claire sitting in a park, her hand resting on Ethan's. And the last photo, her hand pressed over her stomach, smiling faintly. The caption scrawled underneath, in rushed handwriting, 8 weeks. The world went silent. The rain, the ticking clock, even the hum of the refrigerator all stopped for a breath that never came back. Ethan spoke softly. "She told me she was pregnant, Mr. Miller." The sentence hung in the air, unreal but heavy. My first instinct was disbelief. Claire and I hadn't spoken of children for decades. Time had taken that part of our lives quietly, without announcement. I studied him, this stranger, claiming the impossible. "Pregnant," I said, my voice breaking in a way I hadn't heard in years. He nodded, his eyes raw with fear or guilt. I couldn't tell which. She said it wasn't mine. I froze. That should have been relief. But it wasn't. It was something worse, a void where clarity should be. Ethan continued, his voice trembling. She said it was yours. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the roof like slow applause for a tragedy nobody wanted to watch. I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. The words didn't make sense, not in the physical world. 50 years old, my wife, pregnant. And yet, something deep inside me, the part that remembers details too small to explain, knew this night had been waiting for me. I looked at the envelope again. Beneath the photos was a folded piece of paper, a note in Claire's handwriting. If he comes, tell him the truth is already inside. I didn't ask Ethan to leave. He just stood there, wet and exhausted, his presence more like a shadow than a man. I poured 2 glasses of water, one for him, one for the storm inside my chest. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, too calm. Sit down, I said. If we're going to find the truth, we start here. He nodded, and for a second I saw pity in his eyes. That's when I realized the most painful part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's discovering how many people already knew. Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon, like the world clearing its throat before confession. And in that small, dim kitchen, with a stranger's eyes fixed on mine, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever truth waited in that envelope, it was no longer about my wife. It was about what she'd become when I wasn't looking. Morning came big in the night, behind it like a half-remembered lie. The storm had passed, but the house still felt soaked in something heavier than rain. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, his wet jacket hanging over the chair. I sat across from him, a half-empty glass of water untouched in my hand. The envelope lay open between us, its contents now a wound that wouldn't close. The clock said 47 a.m., but time had stopped meaning anything after his words. She said it was yours. I watched the light creep through the kitchen blinds, slicing the room into stripes of gold and gray, the same colors that had ruled our marriage for years. Warmth and distance, comfort and denial. The longer I stared at those bands of light, the more they looked like prison bars. When Claire came downstairs, she looked exactly as she always did. Calm, polished, her hair pinned neatly, a silk robe drawn tight. But there was something about her stillness that unsettled me. Like someone rehearsing normalcy. She froze when she saw him. "Who's this?" Ethan stirred, startled awake. He stood too quickly, eyes darting between us. "Claire," he whispered, his voice cracking like the morning frost. The look on her face said everything before words arrived. Fear, recognition, calculation. I'd seen her wear those expressions before, but never all at once. I didn't move. "You know him," I said quietly. She swallowed. "John." "Say it," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of every silent dinner we'd ever shared. Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked at Ethan, then at me. "It's not what you think." Then help me think better, I said. She took a breath, steady but shallow. Ethan's a friend. Ethan's jaw tightened. Claire, don't. Enough. She snapped. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The calm house became a stage. I was no longer her husband, just an audience she didn't expect to still be watching. I stood. You told Tim you lived alone. She blinked, color draining from her face. What? He told me everything I said. The photos, the note, the story about a child. The word child seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. John, you have to believe me. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't supposed to what I asked. End up here, in my house, at my table. Ethan turned away, muttering, I shouldn't have come. But I stopped him. No, you did the right thing. My tone softened. Not for him, but for the truth trying to surface. We all deserve to know the kind of lies we're living in. Claire's eyes filled, but not the kind of tears that come from remorse. They were the tears of someone realizing her script had run out of lines. She sat down. I met him a year ago, at the clinic. I was volunteering. The clinic. The word struck a nerve I hadn't felt in years. My wife, who had barely left the house since retirement, who claimed she hated hospitals. I helped him through something, she continued. It wasn't romantic at first. He was lost. I was lonely. I wanted to say something, but the words refused. There's a particular cruelty in hearing your wife describe another man in using the same vocabulary she once used for you. Ethan looked down. She never meant to hurt you, Mr. Miller. I almost laughed. Hurt me. The word felt too small. This wasn't when it was recognition. The moment you realized the fracture in your life wasn't sudden. It had been spreading quietly, like a hairline crack, in glass, invisible until it shattered. Pregnant, I said finally, the syllables cold in my mouth. You expect me to believe that? Claire hesitated. John, listen. Was it true? I asked again. Her silence was answer enough. I turned toward the window, the morning sun breaking through the last of the clouds. Outside, the world looked painfully ordinary birds on the fence, wet leaves shining on the lawn. How could everything stay so normal when my life had just broken symmetry? Ethan stepped back, unsure whether to leave or stay. Claire reached for me. Please, John, she said softly. You don't understand. No, I said, still facing the light. I understand more than you think. She lowered her hand slowly, her breath shaky. I made mistakes, she whispered. People make mistakes, I said. But mistakes don't come knocking at midnight. The silence that followed was dense, almost physical. I could hear the faint drip of water from Ethan's coat, the ticking clock, the fragile hum of the refrigerator, all the tiny sounds that exist only when truth removes all the big ones. When I turned around, Claire looked smaller somehow, like the house itself had begun to reject her. You once told me, I said quietly, that truth doesn't destroy, it reveals. So let's see what's left when this one's done revealing. Ethan looked at her one last time, then slipped out the door without another word. She didn't chase him, didn't even look back. When the door closed, the sound lingered longer than it should have. I picked up the envelope again, running my fingers over its warped edges. Beneath the photos, I found something new, something I hadn't seen the night before. A receipt from the clinic, dated 2 weeks ago. The total $3,200. The reason prenatal consultation. For a moment, I thought the house itself might collapse under the weight of it. I placed the paper down gently, like it was something fragile, because it was. The truth always is. And as Claire stood there, eye fixed on mine, I saw no guilt, no denial, only the quiet resignation of someone who knew the storm had finally caught up. The hairline crack was no longer invisible. It was right there, splitting the morning light in two. The receipt lay on the table like a confession written in numbers. $3,200 for a prenatal consultation. The paper had started to curl at the edges, absorbing the dampness from Ethan's jacket, from the air, from everything unsaid between us. Claire stood across the kitchen, her arms crossed, her breath steadying itself into quiet defiance. The morning light caught the side of her face, outlining her in gold. It would have been beautiful if not for the truth bleeding underneath it. "How long were you planning to hide this?" I asked. My voice was soft, too soft. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me the way one might look at a painting that's been hanging too long, familiar, but no longer comforting. "I wasn't hiding it," she said finally. "I was trying to understand it myself." "Understand," I echoed. "You don't understand pregnancy, Claire. You experience it. You live it. You feel it. You can't just think your way through it." Her eyes hardened. "You think this is simple?" "I think honesty is," I said. She took a step closer, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the morning air. "It wasn't supposed to happen, John." I let out a dry laugh. That's what people say about every disaster. Her lip trembled. "You're cruel." "Not cruel," I said, just awake. For a moment, neither of us moved. The ticking clock filled the silence with small, precise accusations. I turned to the counter and picked up the receipt again. "Why the clinic? Why not our doctor?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I didn't want anyone to know." "That includes me." She looked down. I thought it would go away. The words hit harder than I expected. Go away. Like it was an inconvenience, not a life-altering truth. "Claire," I said slowly, "I need to know the truth. Was it real? Were you really pregnant?" She looked up at me with something between fear and fury. "Does it matter now?" "It matters to me." Her silence said more than any answer could. I set the receipt back down. "You said you were lonely. So was I. But I didn't turn that loneliness into a second life." Her eyes filled. "I was scared, John." I nodded. "Fear explains what we do. It doesn't excuse it." The kitchen felt smaller with every word. The air was thick, heavy with memory. There was a time we'd stood in this very room, laughing about burnt toast, whispering plans for a future that no longer fit us. The irony wasn't lost on me that a house built on quiet love could now echo so loudly with silence. I walked to the window, needing distance. Outside, the storm had left behind puddles reflecting the pale sky. Everything looked clean. Everything except us. Behind me, I heard her whisper, "I went there because I thought something was wrong. I thought maybe it wasn't possible. I just needed to know." I turned slowly. "And what did they tell you?" She hesitated. Then quietly, "They said it was early. Too early to tell." The words echoed in my chest, like a slow, hollow drum. Too early to tell. I studied her face, every detail I'd memorized over 30 years. The small scar near her jawline from a camping trip long ago. The way her eyes darkened when she lied. The trembling at the corner of her mouth when she tried not to. "Why Ethan?" I asked. Of all people, why him? She closed her eyes. "Because he listened." The simplicity of it broke me more than any confession could. Because he listened. I'd spent decades believing silence was love, that peace was proof of understanding. But maybe silence had just been distance wearing a polite face. "He needed someone," she continued, and I wanted to feel needed again. For the first time, I saw not the woman who betrayed me, but the woman who'd been fading long before the betrayal began. And I wondered quietly if I'd been the one who let her disappear. "Did you love him?" I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. "No." "Then why does it sound like you did?" She turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Because I wanted to." That honesty cut deeper than the affair itself. I walked toward her, not out of anger, but resignation. "Claire, I can forgive what you did," I said softly, "but I can't forgive what you became to do it." She looked up, confused. "What I became?" "Yes," I said, "a stranger." We stood there inches apart, separated by decades of unsaid truths. Then I saw her look shift, not toward me, but to the table behind me. Her eyes widened slightly. I turned and saw it. A small slip of paper that had fallen from the envelope, different from the receipt. A business card. Riverside Women's Clinic on one side, and on the back, handwritten words. "For follow-up, DNA verification pending." I stared at it for a long time, my pulse steady but cold. "You said it was too early to tell," I said quietly. She didn't answer. Her silence was almost merciful this time. I placed the card back on the table. "You know," I said, "truth doesn't always arrive to save us. Sometimes it just comes to measure what's left." She turned away, pressing her hands to her face. And for the first time since the knock at midnight, I didn't feel anger. I felt something heavier, something final. The slow realization that the proof we think we're searching for isn't about confirming betrayal. It's about confirming who we are once it's found. As the light shifted across the kitchen floor, dividing gold from gray, I whispered the thought that had been circling my mind since the night before. Some lies aren't meant to deceive. They're meant to protect the version of love that used to be true. I didn't go to work that day. The office could wait. Truth couldn't. Claire moved quietly through the house, avoiding my eyes. Her presence reduced to soft footsteps and the sound of drawers opening and closing upstairs. By afternoon, she had packed a small suitcase. She said she was staying with her sister for a few days. I didn't stop her. Some departures don't need permission. They just need silence to make them real. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the empty hallway, the air still trembling from her absence. The smell of her perfume lingered like a question that wouldn't go away. I sat at the table and looked again at the receipt. The photos, the business card from Riverside Women's Clinic. The words DNA verification pending looped through my head like a quiet metronome. There was only one way to know what that meant. By evening, I was standing in front of the clinic. It was smaller than I imagined, one of those sterile white buildings tucked behind a pharmacy with a glass door that reflected more of yourself than what's inside. The sign said closed at 6:00 p.m. It was 6:12. I almost left, but the woman behind the counter, still tidying up, noticed me. "We're closed, sir," she said kindly. I nodded. "I know. I'm not here for an appointment. I just have a question." She hesitated. "What kind of question?" I held out the card. "This was found in my house." Her eyes flicked down, then up again, careful. "I'm sorry we can't discuss patient information." "I'm not asking for information," I said. "I just want to know what this means." I pointed to the words on the back, DNA verification pending. Her professionalism wavered just slightly. "That's usually part of a paternity consultation, sir. Results are handled privately." "I see," I said, quietly. She studied me for a moment, probably guessing more than I said. "If you were listed as the potential match, you'd be notified by mail." "By mail?" "Yes." I exhaled slowly. "Then I guess I'll wait for the mail." She gave me a sympathetic look, the kind reserved for people who come to clinics looking for answers no science can fix. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp, the evening light thinning into blue. Across the street, a bakery was closing. 2 children ran past me, laughing, their shoes slapping against wet pavement. For a second, I wondered if truth had an age limit, if it was kinder only when you were young enough to survive it. I drove home with the radio off. The car hummed in its own rhythm, steady, repetitive, like my thoughts. Each red light was an invitation to turn around. But I didn't. The road home felt longer than usual, stretched by what I knew and what I didn't. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still on. I hadn't turned it off since the night Ethan knocked. Maybe part of me expected someone else to come knocking, maybe the truth itself. Inside the house greeted me with its familiar stillness. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table where every lie had been spoken and every truth had landed. The chair across from me was empty, but I could still see her sitting there, head bowed, hands folded. I reached for the envelope again. Something had shifted. It wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about sequence, timing, logic. The pieces didn't fit. The pregnancy, the receipt, the photos each suggested a story, but not the same one. I turned the photos over. One had a faint date stamp in the corner, June 12th. 2 months ago. But the receipt was dated October 3rd. 4 months apart. The supposed 8 weeks in the photo didn't line up with the medical consultation. "Proofs that don't add up," I murmured. I opened my laptop and searched for the clinic's name. The browser filled with links, patient reviews, addresses, one local article about funding cuts. Then something else caught my eye. A small mention in a legal forum, Riverside Women's Clinic, under review for irregular billing and falsified patient records. My chest tightened. I clicked the link, but it was dead removed. I leaned back. My reflection on the dark screen looked older, more tired, as if the monitor itself were mirroring my thoughts. Was it possible the receipt was fake? Or worse, was it possible Ethan had been part of something larger than guilt? The doorbell rang. I froze. The sound sliced through the quiet like lightning through glass. When I opened the door, no one was there. Only an envelope on the mat. My name written in thick, hurried ink. I stepped outside, scanning the street empty. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper folded once. I unfolded it slowly. It was a lab report. Header: Riverside DNA verification. Result pending confirmation. Possible data inconsistency. Below that, a handwritten note, Mr. Miller. I think someone altered the samples. We need to talk. No signature. No number. Only one line at the bottom, scribbled in pencil. Don't trust the clinic. I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. Behind me, the house was silent. Again. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. Somewhere out there, someone was still moving the pieces. And as I locked the door, I realized the quiet investigation had already begun. Only I wasn't the one conducting it. The truth was, that night the house no longer felt like mine. Every sound carried weight. The hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of curtains, the heartbeat of silence. I sat in the dark living room, the clinic note trembling in my hand. Don't trust the clinic. I read it again and again, until the words lost shape. The receipt, the photo, the note from Claire, they were all mirrors, reflecting pieces of a truth that didn't align. When you live by reason, you forget how exhausting it is to demand answers from chaos. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Miller. A woman's voice tight with hesitation. This is Dr. Hayes from Riverside Clinic. I straightened. Yes. I shouldn't be calling, but your samples were tampered with. There was a third participant. My pulse steadied. Who? We don't know. Your wife came in for another test 2 weeks ago. The file vanished yesterday. Someone deleted it. Her voice lowered. She looked afraid, Mr. Miller. The call ended before I could reply. For a while, I just stared at the phone, its black screen reflecting my face, unfamiliar older, hollowed by disbelief. Then I drove to the clinic the next morning. It was small, quiet, tucked behind a pharmacy, closed. But as I sat in my car, I saw a man in a dark coat leaving through a side door. His stride, steady, deliberate, felt familiar. Ethan, I called. He stopped, then turned pale under the morning light. You shouldn't be here, he said. Neither should you. He looked around, uneasy. She told me someone was watching her. She said if I didn't stay away, we'd both regret it. Who's watching? He hesitated, then pulled a folded photograph from his coat. She left this for me, said to give it to you if things got bad. It was Claire outside the clinic, talking to a man in a gray suit. The angle hid his face, but I knew the shape of those shoulders, that calm stance. Victor, My business partner. My throat tightened. You're sure this is real? Ethan nodded. He was the one she said could make things disappear. Disappear. A word that tastes like money and guilt. I pocketed the photo. Where is she now? He shook his head. She's gone, Mr. Miller. But she wanted me to tell you none of this was supposed to reach you. The way he said it made me wonder if truth itself had been collateral damage. When I returned home, the house felt different. The air heavier, deliberate. On the staircase sat a suitcase mine. A note on top. You were never meant to find the clinic. I did it for both of us. Don't look for me. Her handwriting was shaky, rushed, but still hers. I sank onto the step, reading it twice. Each line felt like a thread, unraveling everything I thought I knew. She hadn't just been hiding guilt. She'd been trying to contain something larger. I thought of Victor, his practiced calm in board meetings, his strange loyalty, his quiet interest in my family. The photo burned in my pocket. There were layers here, lies stacked like reflections in a mirror, each one pretending to be the last. I poured myself a glass of water, the kind gesture people make before accepting defeat. But this wasn't defeat. It was recalibration. The truth had grown too large to fit inside words now. It needed movement. I walked through the house slowly, touching the furniture we'd chosen together, the paintings she'd insisted on keeping. Each object reflected some version of us, the life we performed, not the life we lived. For years I'd mistaken silence for peace, endurance for strength. But now I saw it clearly. Silence is just a room where lies echo without being challenged. The lamp flickered as I sat by the window. My reflection looked like a man, half lit, one side warm, the other fading into gray. Maybe that's what marriage becomes, after decades, light and shadow, trying to coexist without consuming each other. Somewhere between those reflections, Claire had slipped away, not just from me, but from the version of herself that once believed truth was enough. Outside, the street was empty. The world kept turning indifferent. And in that indifference, I found something close to peace. Because sometimes, to see clearly, you have to stand inside the ruin long enough to understand why it fell. I whispered to the window. My voice, barely a breath. You can't fix what doesn't want to be healed. You can only decide when to stop bleeding for it. The day Claire left, the house felt rearranged by absence. Even the air was different, like it was holding its breath. Her note sat on the table, folded with care, as if precision could soften what it meant. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even say goodbye. Just a warning disguised as mercy. By evening, I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. Hunger wasn't something you felt in times like this. It was something you remembered you were supposed to feel. I made a plate of food anyway, a ritual, pretending to be normal life. 2 plates out of habit. When I set the second one down, the chair across from me stayed empty. I didn't move it. The clock ticked through the silence. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, then stopped. The sound of it reminded me how far voices could travel and how quickly they could vanish. At 8:30, someone knocked. Once, then again. I opened the door expecting Ethan, but it wasn't him. Victor stood on the porch, coat collar up, face unreadable, under the porch light. "Evening, John," he said. His tone was polite, almost casual. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside. He looked around the living room like he was inspecting damage he hadn't expected to be visible. "Claire's not here," I said. "I know," he replied. "She called me." The words landed heavy. "Well, yesterday. She sounded shaken. Said she was leaving town for a while." He paused, studying my face. "She didn't tell you?" "She left a note." He nodded slowly. "Then you know." I sat down, motioning toward the chair across from me. He stayed standing. "What do you want, Victor?" He hesitated before answering. "I came to make sure you weren't planning to do anything impulsive." Impulsive. I almost laughed. "Like what?" "You're a rational man," he said carefully. "Let's keep it that way." His tone was calm, but I heard what was underneath it. Control, not concern. I'd worked beside him for years, watched him negotiate, charm, and manipulate entire rooms. He spoke softly when he wanted to sound honest. "Tell me something," I said. "Why were you at the clinic?" He blinked too quickly. "Clinic." I slid the photo across the table. He didn't look down right away. When he did, his reaction was too measured. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" He sighed, taking off his gloves. "John, I was helping her. She came to me months ago about a financial issue. The clinic had been overcharging her. She asked me to review the paperwork. And the DNA testing." He looked at me, steady. I told her to drop it. Said it would cause more harm than good. She didn't listen. "No," he said quietly. "She never did." He glanced toward the kitchen counter at the unopened bottle of wine Claire had bought the week before. "She thought the world of you," he said. "That's not what she told Ethan." He didn't flinch, but his voice lowered. "Ethan's unstable. You shouldn't trust anything he says." I studied him. "You sound nervous, Victor." He smiled faintly. "I'm concerned."
"For who?"
"For both of you," he said. "There are people involved. You don't understand." I leaned forward. "Then help me." He hesitated. "It's not that simple." "It never is," I said. "But start somewhere." He ran a hand through his hair. "Claire was approached months ago by someone connected to the clinic, someone who claimed to have access to confidential files. He wanted money to destroy them. She came to me for help." "You paid him off." "I tried, but it didn't end there." He looked genuinely tired now, as if the lie, whatever shape it had, was wearing him down. "She told me she'd fix it," he continued. "Then she disappeared. And when you started asking questions, I realized she hadn't fixed anything. She'd made it worse." The air in the room thickened. I poured 2 glasses of water, out of habit again. One slid toward him. He didn't touch it. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Was she pregnant?" He didn't answer. "Not directly. She believed she was," he said finally. "But I think someone made her believe it." The sentence hung between, like a bridge made of glass. He stood, putting on his gloves again. "Let it go, John. She's gone. You won't like what you find if you keep digging." I followed him to the door. "You're protecting her," I said. "I'm protecting you," he replied, and then he left. I stood there watching his car disappear down the street. The night was colder now. The plate of food sat untouched on the table. I sat down again across from the empty chair and stared at it until the lines of it blurred into memory. I'd built a life on the idea that truth once found could restore what was broken. But sitting there in that dim kitchen, I realized truth doesn't fix, it exposes. And once it's exposed, all you can do is decide what kind of man you'll be when there's nothing left to believe in. The food had gone cold. The light flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere inside the silence, I could almost hear her voice. Not the woman who left, but the one who once promised, "We'll always tell each other the truth." This, I thought, was the supper she'd left me with, truth served cold, without appetite, without comfort, just enough to keep me alive long enough to face what came next. The first snow came early that year. Thin, uncertain flakes, brushing against the window like they were afraid to stay. I sat in my office, the blinds half drawn, the desk covered in papers that had stopped meaning anything. The world outside looked peaceful, but I'd learned peace was just the quiet before something breaks. Claire had been gone 3 weeks. No word, no message, nothing but the echo of her last line. "Don't look for me." I hadn't obeyed. Some promises are impossible to keep. The clinic was under investigation now. I knew because a man from the police called that morning, asking questions that didn't sound like questions. "Did your wife ever mention falsified records, Mr. Miller?" I told him no, though I wasn't sure what counted as a lie anymore. I spent the afternoon sorting old photographs, trying to find the moment when the distance began. There were dozens of images of us smiling on beaches and restaurants, at family gatherings, but in each one, our bodies leaned just slightly away. Small things you don't see until you know where to look. In one picture, she was laughing at something I'd said. I remembered that day, clearly winter in Oregon, the smell of pine and salt in the air. She'd taken my gloves off to hold my hands because hers were cold. "We'll remember this," she'd said. She was right, just not in the way she imagined. The knock came again that evening. Always the knock. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, thinner, his face drawn tight from sleepless nights. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "I know," he replied, "but you need to see this." He handed me a small USB drive. Its metal scratched, the label half torn. "Where did you get it?" "From her," he said. "She asked me to hold it. Said it would keep us both safe." "Safe from what?" He hesitated. "From Victor." I let him in. The air outside carried snow now, fine and quiet. He stood by the table while I plugged the drive into my laptop. A folder appeared, 2 files. One labeled Clinic Recordings, the other Personal/Journal. I opened the first. The audio crackled, then a voice, Claire's. "I don't know who's altering the results. They said the test was tampered with. I don't believe them anymore. Victor keeps calling, telling me it's handled. It's not. If something happens to me, tell John I tried." The room went still. Ethan's breathing was shallow beside me. I played the second file. The sound of an office typing distant conversation. Then Victor's voice, faint but distinct. Make sure the report lists her name. That'll keep him quiet. It ended there. I leaned back, my pulse steady but cold. You recorded this. Ethan shook his head. She did? Sent it to me last month. I didn't know what to do with it. Why bring it now? He looked up, eyes tired. Because she's gone, and I think Victor's trying to find me next. I studied him for a moment. He looked broken, like a man who'd spent too long carrying someone else's secret. You're telling me Victor had something to do with this? I think he had everything to do with it, Ethan said. The pregnancy, the tests, it was all leverage. She wanted to expose him for the clinic fraud. He used her instead. I stood the chair, scraping against the floor. And what did she want from me? He hesitated then. She thought you'd know what to do when it all fell apart. I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that sounds more like disbelief. She overestimated me. Ethan looked down. No, she trusted you. Trust. The word felt strange in the room. I copied the files to my desktop, then removed the drive and handed it back. You keep this. If anything happens to me, you take it to the police. He stared at me. You think he'll come after you? I think he already has. He left soon after, pulling his coat tight as he stepped into the snow. I watched from the window until he disappeared into the pale distance. When I turned back to the room, the glow of the laptop cast faint light across the table. I played the recording one more time, her voice trembling but calm, like she knew this would be the only way I'd ever hear the truth. Tell John I tried. The words weren't about guilt or forgiveness. They were about survival. Outside, the wind rose, scattering snow against the window pane. I thought of that trip years ago, of her hands wrapped around mine, of how something so warm could vanish without leaving a mark. Maybe that's what memory is: heat that refuses to admit it's fading. I closed the laptop. The reflection in the dark screen showed me sitting alone, surrounded by fragments of what used to be love and what had become evidence. Somewhere in between, I realized I didn't hate her. I hated the part of myself that hadn't seen it sooner. The snow kept falling soft and endless, covering everything that still looked like proof. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than sound. I brewed coffee, stared out the window, and waited for a reason not to do what I already knew I would. At 8 a.m., I called Victor's office. His assistant said he was out of town. I didn't believe her. By noon, I was parked outside his building, engine running, the USB drive in my pocket. I'd played Claire's recording so many times. The words had burned themselves into memory. Tell John I tried. Victor's car appeared just before 1. He stepped out in a gray coat, composed as always. He didn't see me until I was already crossing the street. John, he said almost pleasantly, you should have called. I did. He smiled faintly. Then you already know I'm busy. I know you're lying, I said. The calm slipped a little. What's this about? I held up the drive. About what you did to her. He didn't flinch. You should be careful making accusations. I have proof. Her recordings. Your voice. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A small shift. The kind of movement a man makes when he realizes the mask won't fit anymore. John, he said evenly. Claire was unstable. She imagined threats where there were none. I tried to help her. By changing her test results, he looked almost offended. You think I care about that? I think you cared about keeping your clinic quiet, I said. She found something, didn't she? Something worth silencing. His silence was answer enough. We stood there in the parking lot, two men pretending civility, while truth clawed at the edges. I could destroy you with this, I said. He nodded slowly. Or destroy what's left of her. The words hit harder than I expected. What do you mean? He stepped closer. She made mistakes, John, dangerous ones. If you push this, they won't go after me. They'll go after her. Even dead women can be ruined. I stared at him. You're bluffing. Try me. His calm was back now, practiced and heavy. The same calm that could sell lies in boardrooms and funerals alike. I didn't say another word. I turned in and walked back to my car, the USB burning cold in my hand. Halfway home, I realized what he meant. Claire hadn't disappeared out of fear. She disappeared to protect me from him, from whatever he'd built behind that clinic. When I reached the house, the lights were on. I hadn't left them that way. Inside the living room was untouched, except for one thing, a file on the coffee table. My name written across the top. I opened it. Inside were copies of the same documents from the clinic. Lab forms, signatures, and a photo of Claire at an airport. She wasn't gone. She'd run. The phone rang once. I answered. Static. Then a voice. John, if you want to help her, you'll come tonight. Bring the drive. The line cut, no name, but I knew who it was. I looked at the snow. Outside the world, quiet, suspended. There's a moment when fear turns into focus. When grief stops asking why and starts asking where. I put on my coat, slid the drive into my pocket, and stepped out into the cold. Whatever truth was waiting tonight, it wouldn't be gentle. The address came an hour later, an abandoned restaurant near the old industrial district. Snow covered the road in thin, glassy sheets. I drove without music, headlights carving tunnels through the white. Every mile brought back the same question. If she was alive, why hadn't she called me herself? The parking lot was empty, except for one car, Victor's. Its lights-off windows frosted. I parked across from it and stepped out, my breath visible in the cold. The air smelled of metal and old rain. Inside the restaurant was half-lit chairs, overturned dust thick on every surface. Victor sat at a table near the back, a folder beside him, his hands folded neatly. You came, he said. You said she needed help. He nodded toward the seat across from him. Sit. I stayed standing. Where is she? He looked almost amused. You really don't understand, do you? I pulled out the USB drive. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Not exactly. What I wanted was control. You took that from me when you started asking questions. I set the drive down. Down between us, then take it. And tell me where she is. He studied me for a long moment. Do you know what happens when people dig too deep into things that don't concern them, John. They start mistaking survival for justice. Is that what you call this? He smiled slightly. I call it balance. Before I could speak, a door creaked open behind me, footsteps slow, familiar. I turned. Claire. She looked thinner. Her face, pale eyes, tired. Her voice was barely above a whisper. John, don't. I stared at her. You're alive. She shook her head. Alive is not the same as free. Victor leaned back, his confidence returning. She came to me, John, begged me to make it all disappear. I did, until you brought it back. Claire's voice trembled. He's lying. I looked between them. Then tell me the truth. Her eyes flicked toward the drive. That's not what he wants. He already has what he needs.
Oh, what's that?
Victor stood. A confession. He reached into his coat, pulling out his phone. On the screen, a live recording. My voice from the night before. The confrontation in the parking lot. You think I'd come here without leverage, he said. Claire's voice cracked. He's framing you, John. The clinic, none of it's what you think. I took a step forward. Then what is it? She hesitated, tears welling. It wasn't about pregnancy. It was about data, donor samples. They were selling them. I found out, and he used my name on the records to cover it up. Victor's face tightened. That's enough. He moved closer, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not of me, but of what might come next. Claire reached into her coat, pulling out a second drive. The real evidence. Everything they did. It's over, Victor. He froze. Then almost softly. You think anyone will believe you? She smiled faintly. I don't need them to. I just need one person to. I took the drive from her hand. Victor lunged forward, but the sound of sirens cut through the air before he reached Emmy. Red and blue lights bled through the frosted windows. Claire exhaled. I called them before you arrived. Victor's expression shifted from power to panic. The police burst in seconds later. They pulled him away, shouting rights orders names. He didn't resist. He didn't. When the door slammed behind him, silence fell again. Claire sat down exhausted. I stayed standing, watching the snow drift through the open doorway. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. After a long time, she whispered, I didn't want you to see this side of me. I think I always did, I said. I just didn't know what I was looking at. The sirens faded, replaced by the quiet hum of wind through broken glass. For the first time in months, the silence felt honest. The police lights faded before dawn. By the time the last car left, the snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of dark earth beneath. Claire sat on the back steps of the restaurant, wrapped in a coat, too thin for the cold. She didn't look at me when I stepped outside. They'll take him in, I said quietly. She nodded. He won't stay there long. Long enough, I replied. She turned to me, her face, pale, eyes rimmed red from tears that hadn't fully fallen. I never meant for you to get pulled into this. I know, I said. You tried to protect me. But the truth doesn't stay quiet just because we ask it to. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried more regret than comfort. You always were the patient one. We stood there for a while, watching the horizon lighten. The city was still half asleep. Unaware of the wreckage 2 people had left behind in its shadows. What happens now? She asked. You tell them everything, I said. No more disappearing. And you? I go home? Her voice softened. You still think of that place as home. I hesitated. It's where everything started. That's enough. She reached for my hand, then stopped halfway. John, if I had told you earlier, it wouldn't have changed where we ended, I said. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of traffic from the highway. The world was waking up again. I realized how small we were against the noise of it. 2 lives, folded into one long night of consequences. I helped her stand. They'll want a statement. She nodded, brushing snow from her coat. Will you be there? I'll wait outside. When the officers returned, I watched them lead her to the car. She didn't look back this time. The door closed, and the sound of it echoed longer than it should have. By the time I got home, the sun was up. The porch light was still on. I left it that way. The house smelled faintly of coffee and cold air. I walked to the kitchen set, the USB drives on the table, and sat in the same chair I'd sat in the night Ethan arrived. Everything was still there. The receipt, the photos, the glass. I never cleaned. But they didn't matter anymore. Proof stops meaning something when the people tied to it have already paid their price. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window. Outside, the snow was turning to slush, the street glistening in muted gold light. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It just felt honest. Claire had tried. That's what the recording said. Not that she was innocent, not that she was guilty, just that she tried. Maybe that's all any of us ever do. I thought about Ethan, about how youth mistakes chaos for purpose, about how we both found ourselves circling the same woman for different reasons. One out of need, one out of memory. The house creaked as it warmed the sound, low and human. I sat down again, looked at the empty chair across from me, and realized it would never really be empty. Some ghosts stay because they're owed a quiet place to rest. The clock struck 7. I finished the coffee, turned off the light, and opened the door. Outside, the day had already begun. The street smelled of thawing snow and distant smoke. I locked the door behind me and slipped the smaller drive into my coat pocket, not to destroy, but to remember. Because sometimes remembering is the only justice left.